Hi, I'm Sarah Cowgill, along with Andrew Moran, Dave Patterson, John Clark, and Scott Cosenza. And this is the Conservative Five, Liberty Nation's online TV news program. On today's episode, Eye of the Storm, we'll update viewers who haven't had time to tune in with Trump's courtroom respite. Then it's all about America's backlash on current presidential candidates and independents dominate election 2024. We'll also debate the rock and hard place the president finds himself in Biden's Waffle House, and pivot to something that has most Americans frustrated with, do you want fries with that? All this and more coming up in this edition of The Conservative Five.
Just a dollar?
No one is above the law. We hear that parroted phrase on every cable news program and leftist media outlets as former President Donald Trump stands trial on how he accounted for payouts to porn star Stormy Daniels. Stormy Daniels left a lot of people thinking Trump was going to be free at last. Then along came Michael Cohen, Trump's former lawyer and confidant. Cohen testified this week, throwing former First Lady Melania under the bus, along with the mister, by painting a picture of a bully. And, well, we can skip the salacious stuff. Following Cohen, the testimony and cross-examination by the defense, the prosecution is scheduled to rest. At the time of our recording, we have one salient question that matters. Did Trump break the law? Despite the circus outside the courtroom, has the prosecution made its case? There is no one better to explain what has happened in the courtroom with the former president than Scott Cosenza, Esquire. Care to explain where we're at?
You said we could skip the salacious stuff. That doesn't leave much, meat on the bone there, Sarah. It was a shocking display of salacious stuff. I thought just the admission of her testimony at all seemed out of line, generally speaking, to have her as a witness at the trial. And then the things that she did testify to, like you say, the salacious details, have no place in this matter. Mr. Trump is accused of reimbursing Michael Cohen for the confidentiality clause, aka hush money payment to Ms. Daniels. And just the way he made those payments was he structured it as if Mr. Cohen was performing legal services. And it was a way to obtain confidentiality within that payment itself, rather than saying reimbursement for confidentiality payoff, right? In terms of like an accounting thing. And so that's what it's about. But the existence of those payments or that one payment actually, with respect to Ms. Daniels, was never in question. So why was she in court in the first place? In other words, Trump didn't say he didn't pay the money or didn't reimburse Cohen for it. So what is she doing there? Well, if, like me, you believe that the entire prosecution is politically motivated in order to hurt Donald Trump's electoral chances, she provided a massive benefit. News cycle after news cycle with more negative news stories about Donald Trump, and exactly where it hurts: swing state women voters. That's who these salacious details hit the hardest in terms of denigrating Mr. Trump's reputation and maybe swaying some votes where it matters. So okay. I think it was a smashing success for the prosecution in that regard. Did he do anything illegal? Not so far as the prosecution has demonstrated in court. That's the answer to your direct question.
Okay, well, wouldn't the swing state female voters, none of them are perfect, correct? So isn't this basically a non-disclosure agreement that every divorce attorney in the world uses so that they can't bring all this stuff back up? This sounds weird to me. I mean, do you think
it doesn't matter?
Dave,
it doesn't matter what how those potential voters live their own lives. I think what matters is that in publications that they read, and I think probably for most of them, unfortunately, at least not yet, they're not typically LibertyNation.com readers. If they're, these are lower information voters. Our viewers are higher information voters. Our viewers and listeners and readers are higher information voters. And so what we have here is, some negative news story that splashes on the pages that's anti-Trump and in a way that really hits them where they live and makes him, it imputes his character in a bad way. So
Right.
again, that's the political side. There's these two things, right? There's the legal track and the political track. So back to the legal track, if I can, the prosecution has to prove that Donald Trump defrauded someone or something, and also that he knew and intended to violate the federal election law in doing so. So far, I have seen no evidence presented that he did that, except for the opinions of people who were closely associated with Mr. Trump. So in Mr. Cohen's opinion, that's why Mr. Trump did what he did and made that payoff. In Mr. Pecker, the National Enquirer guy, in his opinion, that's why Mr. Trump did what he did. But that's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt that it was Mr. Trump's motivation. And those beliefs of Pecker and Cohen are not supported by direct quotes that establish those points. So I don't understand how those words can establish proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Trump did violate the law.
Hey, Dave, do you think Trump's going to take the stand at any time?
I think that his inclination would be to take the stand and defend himself. But as good as that might make him feel, I think there's too much danger in that. Right now, the basic arguments, as Scott has mentioned, basic arguments are going his way. And there have been a lot of salacious accusations, but that's all there have been. And, there's no evidence of a crime from what the media lawyers have explained. And there were no charges of crimes as we know them, but rather assertions of lousy bookkeeping, and and there's been little in the way of relevant testimony to the bookkeeping irregularities.
Oh, so you mean another accounting, a little bit of an accounting problem might sway the 2024 election?
Well, so far, none of the prosecutor's witnesses have said, yes, I have firsthand knowledge that Donald Trump did X, Y, and Z, and those actions are a crime. I can see no advantage whatsoever for the former President Trump taking the stand and, possibly falling into a prosecutor's cleverly worded gotcha. This trial is so far all about jury perception management. And it has little to do with the unexplained crimes.
Over the winter, but that was the biggest thing that people were polling on for presidential polling. And Reuters had a poll that showed about 1 in 4 Republicans say they would not support Trump if he were convicted of a felony crime. Is that, okay, so that's what everybody was thinking at one time. Are we still thinking that? Are the Republicans still thinking that? Are the Democrats still thinking they have an edge here?
Not really. You look at the exit polls. You show quite the opposite. You see that a majority of the, let's say, Ohio, for example, Republican voters said that they would still support Donald Trump if he were convicted. If you look at the polling data over the last few months, you just see it going up and up and up, including in the key battleground states, as Lisa Donner reported recently, LibertyNation.com. Mm-hmm. You see him leading in, I think four or five of the 6 battleground states. So I think he probably prefers this because he's getting all this free publicity. He grandstands before every day he appears in court. He talks to the press. I think it's like in 2016 where he got about $1 billion in free coverage. He's probably getting about the same amount of thing. Plus, this whole trial is probably angering millions of Americans who think, yeah, this is a weaponization of the justice system, and they're targeting their political opponents.
Now New Jersey is saying that 100,000 people were there on hand at that rally. Does that tell us anything, or is it just optics again, as if it was just a distraction?
Well, I think that George Soros paid 60,000 of them to show up to make Trump look bad. So as a former tax attorney and criminal defense attorney, I have some insights here to add to our House counsel's very good summary of the facts. As a tax attorney, my understanding here, and I don't have Scott's familiarity with this case in detail because it turns my stomach to watch such a fiasco circus as it did in the New York case. But I would, of course, tell him not to take the stand. I'm not sure that it matters for the reasons you and Andrew are intimating at. But as a tax lawyer, as far as I understand, he simply mischaracterized the payment. So it still would have been deductible. So there was no tax fraud. And claims of election subversion are weak, and certainly there's no evidence to it. So that's why he shouldn't say anything, because there'd be good grounds for an appeal. But it seems like Americans have already decided. Joe Biden's constantly saying, oh, he's been charged with 90-something felonies. And so as if he's guilty without being proved guilty. And this is where we see people being punished for the ancient history of bringing Stormy Daniels in to salivate over old details that have nothing to do with his monetary policy or his ability to lead. So despite the polls and some people saying that they would turn against him if he was convicted, I'm not sure that really matters. I think that some people perceive that they would, but in total, what we have also is the contrast that, well, what about the subversion? If this is subversion, what about the subversion of the Hunter laptop? What about the Steele dossier? This is lawfare at its finest. So I think a lot of Americans are going to see through that, so that, frankly, it could backfire on the Democrats. Again, many Democrats, they're not going to vote for him even if he's exonerated. And I think many Republicans are not going to vote for him even if he's convicted. But I think a lot of independents might just start also to have a growing disgust with what really is a witch hunt. And that's what this looks like more all the time. They're looking for minutia to attach, heinous felony charges to. There's no victim here.
They keep finding it.
Sarah, before you come in, let me say this. What you just said, John, is very important for the analysis of this, which is that there is no fraud involved, tax fraud, that is. In other words, Donald Trump's company paid for the payment to Stormy Daniels, $130,000, and it would be an additional crime if somehow that was disallowable as a company payment, and part of the fraud was that he manipulated it so that it would be a company payment. That's not true. As you said, I want to say it again so everybody understands, it was an appropriate deductible payment that can be made through the corporate form. So literally, like, let's say that you were the president of a company and your wife did the books for the company, and you went to a meal that was a company-sponsored meal that was lawfully deductible, but instead of truthfully saying on your reimbursement form that you went to the ice cream parlor because your wife says eat less ice cream, and instead went to the salad bar, which she encourages, and you just wrote that down and you got reimbursed for that, and then that was filed with the state, according to the state of New York. Now that's a potential felony that you can then be prosecuted for, because it was a lie, even though it was a lie that no one relied on to their detriment or no one was defrauded by, just that it was purposefully misstated on the form itself, is that it's somehow, criminal culpability attaches to that.
Thank you, Mr. Cosenza. I mean,
Soapbox.
I also do not tune in to all of the details. It just kind of turns my stomach. So we do appreciate you being here and filling us in on all of the trials and tribulations facing Donald Trump, at least in this case. And Liberty Nation will keep you in the loop, as always. Thanks, panel. It may seem that the rematch of Joe Biden and Donald Trump is all that needs to be discussed in this important election year. But that would be a fallacy. Most Americans, more than ever, identify as independent, and they have actually outnumbered supporters of both political parties since 1991. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who left the party of his iconic family and declared as an independent earlier this year, recently won a spot on the California ballot. He also secured access in Michigan and Utah and is expected to do so in 7 other states relatively soon. And both Trump and RFK will speak at the Libertarian Party convention next week. This election right now can go in any direction because of the independent factor, and we all need to get on board with at least thinking that's a possibility. Do you think, John? Well, it's a long shot for any independent. We know that, but Kennedy is surging, and in the past, a few dark horse candidates have managed to tip a presidential election. Do you see that happening with RFK this time around?
Yeah, I think he's a huge wild card. Whether he could win outright would be, it's kind of a catch-22. People want to back a winner, So if enough people believe that he could really be the change they could believe in and thought he could win, you never know. And some other things could happen between now and November, including the health of the sitting president and other things. And his running mate selection seems to suggest that he's aware of the characterization of him as a right winger. So he's trying to pull from the left, and he seems to be doing so with that selection. So I think it's anybody's guess. But I'm also intrigued by more and more polls showing that large numbers of Americans are moving to that unaffiliated category. And Kelly Ballard did a great piece on this at Liberty Nation on May 11th. I think it was called Independent Voters in the 2024 election. And one of the things she pointed out was that in New Hampshire's primary, 70% of voters identified as unaffiliated, and I beg your pardon, 40% identified as unaffiliated, and 70% of them voted for Nikki Haley. And that, to me, is an interesting picture of how those independent voters might go if they had to choose between two candidates, which, I'm happy to see more. I'm actually working here in Vermont to get Kennedy on the ballot. I think he's a spoiler for the Democrats. We have a uniparty system here. So this is exciting for me that we were moving to a one-party system to 3 candidates. And the whole premise here is that people are becoming independent because they want another option. But I think each side is concerned that a vote for Kennedy will undermine that they rather have not have their opponent win. So Democrats are concerned that a vote for Kennedy might put Trump in the White House, and conversely, Republicans are worried that if they are disenamored by Donald Trump's conviction of a silliness, that they still could put Biden back in. So this makes this, to me, a particularly interesting and difficult to call situation. There are a lot of things.
I'll just cut in here to add that Mr. Clark's campaign activities are his own affair and not something that he does with the imprimatur of Liberty Nation News or its parent corporation, One Generation Away, which is a 501c3 nonprofit and does not engage in political campaigns or electioneering.
Well, and I'll clarify, sorry, because I'm not endorsing him. I'm just helping getting him on the ballot. It doesn't even mean I'll vote for him. I haven't endorsed him for office at all. I'm just
and I agree with allowing the American process to play out.
Yes, I've made it very clear that's what I'm doing. I've got a lot of blowback.
We're all, and even if you weren't, John, we're all allowed our individual activities and opinions. So I wouldn't put a wet damper on it.
No, I just
go back to now. Go back.
We have our Mr. Counselor on the panel, so we need that little every now and again bump so that people understand what we're doing here.
Yeah, we follow the rules.
Yeah, we do. Andrew,
so to add to John's point, that if you look at for example, if you look at the Real Clear Politics average of a 5-way race, Biden, Trump, Cornel West, Jill Stein, and Robert F. Kennedy, Trump still pulls out ahead slightly against Joe Biden. So these votes are definitely, these other candidates are definitely hurting Biden more than Trump. So those polls are really fascinating to watch heading into November.
Well, let's talk about the Hispanic vote.
Hey, before we do that, can I cut in on something else, which is,
sure,
I'll
Scott.
just take it as a yes.
The C1 show today.
Donald Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. are both going to appear at the Libertarian Party convention next week from our record time at the end of June. And, it's just surprising that one party would host candidates from another party. It's kind of a unique position. And also that they obviously see the value there, especially Trump. And I'm told from an inside source, it was his outreach that got the ball rolling in that regard. And if you look at the numbers in those swing states, you will see there are significant percentages that went libertarian in the last presidential race and the one before. And we're talking about a race where, a few thousand votes might make the difference in the next presidential election. And if Donald Trump can get those votes from somebody else who may cast a vote for a libertarian instead of him, I think it's a very interesting play on his part and for RFK to agree to come as well.
So let's talk about the Hispanic vote. They're not all on the same page when it comes down to the two-party system. And I know Dave and I have been talking about this a little bit offline. And I want your take on this.
I think that the media likes to talk about Hispanic voters as though there's some sort of predictable block of voters who vote a specific way, and that's simply not true. I mean, let's take Cuban voters around Miami. They're more likely to vote Republican. Puerto Rican voters in New York City are more likely to vote Democratic. You know, the media likes to conflate Hispanics with Latinos, and that's simply inaccurate. Hispanics are people who speak Spanish, and they come from all manner of countries and cultures. Latinos are generally associated with South Central America, Latin America, and so Latinos are Hispanic, but not all Hispanics are Latinos. But if you look at a demographic, you know, there are statistics that, you know, you can use to be descriptive. For example, according to Pew Research data in 2024, there are 36.2 million Hispanic eligible voters. And that's up from 2020 by 3.9 million, a 12% change. And you can count on every year another 1.4 Hispanics become eligible voters. But for the Trump campaign, I think there's a modestly good news. You know, back in January, a USA Today and Suffolk University survey showed that the former President Trump, with a 39-34 advantage in support among Latino voters. This is something that the Democrats should be concerned about. And also, you know, despite the numbers, turnout rates for Hispanic voters have lagged behind other groups.
Well, every few decades or so, that third party threat makes political pundits a tad delirious. Will this election be one of those, or are we setting up for an also ran lesson in two-party politics like we were back in the 90s with Clinton and Bush?
And
well, it's the same old message that, oh, this is the most important election of your lifetime, and you have to vote for either Republican or Democrat, and you can't waste your vote on a third-party candidate. It's the same message all the time. And then 2028, it's going to be the exact same thing. This is the most important election of your lifetime. Democracy's under threat, so you have to cast a vote for one of the two party candidates.
That adage, if you hear hoofbeats, don't look for zebras, does that apply here? Is it just going to be Trump and Biden to the finish line?
You know, there's during World War II, you know, where Roosevelt came up with a thing that was totally different than it's called. He called it, you know, in World War II, he had the War Production Board. Now, why am I quoting this amazing statement from Joe Biden in 2020? It's because of the fact that he may need another mainstream candidate like RFK to get some of the coverage off of him, so especially heading into November, because he gaffes nonstop and they're getting worse. You know, 4 more years. Pause. And that was all over social media. So perhaps if there's another person that's getting, you know, a lot of attention, but may or may not impact his electoral chance or not, he would want that, especially from a debate perspective. I mean, I mentioned this in the last C5 we had. If there's RFK on the stage, that means that's a good thing for Biden, because that means he's going to talk less and less, and, you know, not call, you know, let's say Martha McCallum call her, I don't know, you know, Roosevelt or something.
Maybe some more family members who were heroes and also victims of cannibalism during one of the great wars.
Uncle Bosie. How could I not mention
Bosie's on the menu?
Well, I think we can all take a certain amount of comfort in the fact that regardless of what President Biden does, he works for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, she's the smartest. She's the smartest. She's smarter than him.
The F-bomb dropping VP.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, That's all right. I don't disagree with that part of it. But so, hey, if you want to deep dive into this issue, go to libertynation.com and read Kelly Ballard's article titled Independent Voters in the 2024 Election. Thanks, panel. And thanks for tuning in. The ridiculousness of Joe Biden's inability to commit to either Israel or the pro-Palestinian mob is getting worse by the day. The administration does not want the Israeli Defense Force to hit Rafah, a known location where the remaining terrorist organization is holed up because of what could be an unacceptable loss of civilians. It seems the administration has alternative ways to address the war, dismantle Hamas, and make everybody happy. Whoever has this magic plan of action might want to pull it out of wherever it was stashed. It's been 8 months, folks. Let's hear some strategy. And of course, we'd all like to know what the big plan is all about. Dave?
It doesn't matter, Sarah, whether it's support for Israel or resistance to Ukraine. You know, the Biden administration has no plan, no strategy, no clear understanding of an objective. This lack of geopolitical situation awareness has been a lasting feature of the Biden administration. Everything the Biden administration has done up to this point in its what I refer to as the jello-clad versus ironclad commitment to Israel and their life and death struggle, which is really what it is in defeating the terrorist organization Hamas, has been prefaced with "don't kill any civilians." But even the Biden administration admits that the murderous Hamas organization, they hide behind civilians. So it's pretty difficult to kill Hamas without collateral damage. And, you know, this feckless national security team Biden has is, you know, it views every national crisis, you know, through a political lens, which leaves the American people as the losers. Biden worries about deaths of Palestinian civilians in Gaza, but he holds up the delivery of precision-guided weapons that reduce collateral damage. This, you know, could easily force the Israel Defense Force to use less precise weapons, which will have a potential for greater civilian deaths. And they speak with forked tongue. Secretary of State has reaffirmed U.S. support for ensuring an end to Hamas and ensuring that there will be no Hamas government in Gaza. And yet, he says that they won't support the ferreting out and destroying Hamas terrorist battalions in Rafah. As you point out, the last vestige, there's 4 Hamas battalions are dug in. And the national security advisor, he talks to Israeli counterpart, emphasizing once again that they need to destroy Hamas, but with fewer civilian casualties. And, you know, if there were alternatives, which he suggests there are, why this brain trust in the White House has not mentioned those alternatives with fewer civilian casualties while destroying Hamas, why they haven't mentioned them over the last 8 months, just demonstrates that what they're proposing is anything but ironclad. It's confusing and contradictory, and it's why you have people rioting on our university campuses without knowing why.
Oh, Andrew, this is Joe Biden's kinder, gentler 2.0 way of governing, but don't you see that we're all just going to hug it out? Or are they just stalling? Are they stalling, perhaps?
2 letters. Oil. I'm joking. It's 3 letters. I know it's 3 letters. I'm trying to paraphrase Joe Biden, but no, it would not. That's the major thing for Joe Biden right now in his foreign policy is that he wants to stall. He wants to make sure to escalate because of oil prices. I mean, you see the on again, off again war risk premium in the energy markets. You know, you see the Brent and WTI. They're struggling at $80 because you know investors have no clue what's happening in the Middle East. I mean, is it going to escalation? Is it going to de-escalate? Who knows what's happening? But overall, it does not surprise me if the Biden White House is stalling. You know, many hardcore progressives, you know, they're struggling to support Biden because of Israel, which is why the administration is probably tergiversating on its position on the Israeli issue. But if you look at some of the polling data, you know, despite Biden's abysmal rating on a whole range of issues, including foreign policy, you see, let's say the Pew Research Center, they said that for most Americans, they want Biden to focus on domestic issues. I think it was 83% believe it is more important for Biden to concentrate on domestic policy compared to 14% who say he should focus on foreign policy. Now, when Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, when they're struggling to fill their gas tanks, when they're slipping into delinquency rates, which was highlighted in the recent New York Fed quarterly report, why would they care what's happening 2,000 miles across the globe? Why would they care of what's happening between Iran, Israel, Gaza, Palestinians? They don't care about that. They care about, well, guess what? The kitchen table economics. I know that's I can't say it's a trope to say that these days, but that's what they focus on.
Well, what would happen? Let's just say, Biden takes a stand or doesn't. But what happens if he just says, "Hey, you guys work it out. We're backing off. I'm not going to support any of you." What would happen, Scott?
Well, as a libertarian, I love that. I love that idea.
Yes. Yes, Scott.
That the United States
Woohoo.
citizens whose compelled tax payments are used to buy these weapons, that we only use those weapons in defense of our and our interests. And I don't mean that writ large, broadly across the world, but directly in defense of our own territory against aggressors. That's what seems to me to be the constitutional way to proceed. And I would just say, back to your sort of initial point in this segment, Sarah, I disagree that Biden is vacillating or somehow we can't track what he's up to. It's very clear. He's committed with 100% of his effort to reelection. And whoever he can support in furtherance of that, I think that's the way to process it. It's just, these are just pieces on a chessboard. It's like a risk game for those who know the board game. It doesn't matter. It's whatever accrues to his reelection. And I think that what you asked me, though, would probably not accrue to his reelection, meaning, broadly speaking, conservatives seem to be on the let's fully fund Israel's defense or offense, however you want to say it. And for so many on the left, it is the opposite. Maybe not even just withhold funding, but not necessarily fund Hamas, but fund other economic activity in Gaza to kind of bolster that population. So, but it seems like if we take our founders' vision of liberty, which international struggles and wars should we entangle ourselves with? I don't see why we should with this one. The Israelis seem quite capable of handling things themselves. It's to their detriment that they're on our, they're kind of leeching off us and dependent on us. If they had their own weapons factories, that they didn't have to, to deal with us for these things, they wouldn't have to bother with our domestic politics in their defense.
I have one question.
A lot of land
sorry,
for that.
Sarah, I have one question. Sorry. Dave, what do you think of what Scott just said? We're going to have a huge thing right now.
Well, obviously, Scott takes the libertarian view where there's one person that exists in all of the universe. And as long as there is that one person, then a libertarian point of view is perfectly acceptable. But as soon as there are two people, then there have to be compromises and there have to be ways in which they come together or stay apart. I think that Scott's point of view is one that clearly articulates a libertarian point of view that says, I live in a world that is not interactive. There are no transactions, and consequently, I can do pretty much what I want. That simply is not a reality.
Well, Reagan,
Dave,
if you read the Reagan diary,
hold on just one second, Andrew.
Sorry,
let me just say this. If there's only no one person in the world, we don't need libertarianism, because the principle and animating aspect of libertarianism is what's called the non-aggression principle, which is that you keep your hands to yourself. And if you're the only person in the world, that's not necessary. It's only when there are two or more people that it becomes important, if we all want to live in a society where we get to think and do what we please without other people using might is right. That's where libertarian, the principle of non-aggression comes into play. And for instance, I think it's Israel and Gaza represents a perfect example. What's the right line in terms of going after populations? What is an acceptable civilian casualty loss? I don't know. I know what it would be for me if America was attacked. But to weigh in on that definitively, and I'm a high information voter, and I can tell you that I don't have a good sense of it. The idea that the rest of my neighbors know, and I know that they don't, they're on team either you sympathize with the plight of the Israelis, generally speaking, or you sympathize with the plight of the Palestinians, generally speaking. That seems to be the gist of it. And it just is a poor use for our extracted, compelled payments of tax dollars. Let's not, it's not Joe Biden sending his money over there. He's holding a gun to you and me and everybody else and sending our money over there. And I think that the people who are sour about that have every right to be sour about it.
All right, we need to bring John Clark into this. I know he wants to say something. I mean, he's been doing the side eye to Scott yammering here. So
I have not made any. I've just thought about how I'm in the awkward position of being the mediator between the Liberty Nation libertarian faction and the lone wolf conservative, Mr. Patterson. And so I'm going to try to, as a mediator, take a middle road, which is that, and be more responsive to the question. I think that it's interesting the dispute in Israel is more splintering the left than the right, as you've pointed out, as far as how this impacts our voting. But I also think that there might be a certain naivete, and I am not discounting libertarian arguments here, with which I'm very persuaded. But if Biden is weak and his wheelhouse is a weather vane on the border policies, as Dave mentioned, on just about everything, he's trying to get votes and trying to play both sides of this, emboldens the enemies not just of Israel but of America. And if that results in a deterioration there, it could very much impact our elections, Andrew, because it could in fact impact something called oil prices. There are many choke points there. So I think there are a lot of wild cards there that could directly impact our interests. And I'm not advocating necessarily for colonialism, but there is an existing structure there that needs to be preserved, because an imbalance in the Middle East could have profound impacts for Americans. And that 80% who don't care about foreign affairs will a lot if they have to wait in line to fill up their gas tank, or if it goes to $10 a gallon overnight. So it's hard to extricate these various, philosophical ideas from boots on the ground. And I think that, Blinken, I think today said, Israel has to stay out of Gaza, and he doesn't have an alternative plan. As Dave points out, this is just untenable either for Israel or the Middle East. It really is, in a way, taking sides with Iran, who are allying with Russia and other powers. This is a scary scenario. While we're quibbling over our domestic issues, what's going on in the Middle East and around the world is a very real threat to us.
The U.S. is not going to be able to afford this extravagant foreign policy anymore. So no matter whether you continue want to have all these wars, you want to be engaged in adventurism, the U.S. simply cannot afford it.
Andrew,
Well,
I don't
and
think I don't think it's a question of wanting, and that's my point. You can not want anything you don't want, but the enemy has a vote in all of this, and it's what happened in 9/11. The enemy voted against us, and the enemy votes against us daily. And to not recognize that, and to not recognize that that is part of the complexity of international relationships, is, I think, Pollyannish and a fool's errand.
But when you say
All
who
right,
doesn't
guys,
want, are you kidding me? I think everyone in Washington wants, or I'll say a majority want continued war in the Middle East. Sorry,
We're going to wrap this up, guys. And that means the Biden budget must make some tough decisions. It also means the president must make his words and actions match, because sending confusing, many might call them waffling messages, could make the situation in Israel worse, not better, let alone on our own shores. Thanks, panel. Remember that commercial in the 70s where a businessman stuck waiting on a train spied a McDonald's? That happy guy got a burger, fries, a Coke, and change back from $1. Up until Joe Biden became the president, fast food places all had dollar menus. Today, it's well over probably $12 to eat at those once affordable places for the struggling family. From 2019 to 2023, the limited service meals, that's Andrew Moran's words, not mine, and snacks category has climbed nearly 28%, which means fast food is now higher priced than a regular sit-down restaurant with a server, minus the tip. When it comes to fast and thrifty, it seems people should hit the pricey places. I would, but Andrew, am I oversimplifying this at all?
No, you're absolutely correct. Sit down full service restaurants are now cheaper than fast food places. There was an ad probably a decade ago. I forgot Cedric the Entertainer, and he was promoting a Whopper for $1. There's no way you could ever envision that in today's market. You look at the numbers over the years. You see a Big Mac, for example. A Big Mac has risen about 20% since 2019. Between 2014 and 2024, Popeye's prices have hiked 86%, Jimmy John's 62%, Subway 39%. Now, of course, viewers might be wondering, why is this happening? Is it just Bidenomics? Well, you have a plethora of issues here. You have higher labor costs. Those minimum wage hikes. Let's say California, for example, have weighed on a lot of these franchises. You have greater input price pressures. Think, paper wrappers, for example, that has gone up in price. You have food ingredients costing more. So you have now companies warning. You have, let's say McDonald's and Starbucks as an example. They're warning that their customers are not patronizing these restaurants as much anymore, particularly on the low income scale. When this was the fast food industry's key target, low income patrons who want to take their family to spend $20 on a Big Mac and Happy Meals, and that's just not happening anymore. And now you have other two things happening in the fast food industry. You have one, they're automating their services, or two, and you can look at this on Liberty Nation's X account or Twitter account. You're seeing companies hiring foreign workers through digital screens to help customers. So this is absolutely a transformation of the fast food sector in today's inflationary environment.
Wait a second, Andrew. You mean if I go to my my local McDonald's, I might get like a person in Malaysia or something that's my customer, like he's like shepherding me through the ordering process?
Yeah, so it's not McDonald's right now, but it's going to eventually go to that.
That's going to be helpful.
Complement their automated system. Well, hey, maybe when you can pay these people $3 an hour as opposed to paying them $20 an hour, why wouldn't they make that investment?
I just want to know if my quarter pounder with cheese is still going to be a quarter pound of beef. Are they cutting corners on that?
That would be false advertising if the pre-cooked weight didn't measure up to a quarter pound, and you'd have prosecutions and Federal Trade Commission and everything else. So they're kind of locked in with that one because they locked into that name. It's funny. It's probably the one sandwich that you actually can guarantee. I bet you the other ones have suffered from shrinkflation, but probably sure not the quarter pounder.
You know what they call a quarter pounder with cheese in Paris?
You know what they call a quarter pounder with cheese in Paris?
And what do they call it?
They call it Royale with cheese.
Yes, Royale.
Royale with cheese.
That's right.
By the way, it was $2. They used to go on special in the early 2000s. You could buy 2 Big Macs for $2.
Yeah,
that's where we were. But of course, back then the dollar was worth some money, and as opposed to now, and when it's
so not. Is there a farm factor contributing to unaffordable junk food? Our farmer on I don't do animal farm, I do dirt farming. So Clark, fill us in.
Well, food is something that Americans they care about, and it's very much part of the inflationary structure we're in. It's a little more complex than that. And for instance, you could still have your pre-cooked weight of a quarter pounder and increase the amount of water or pink slime, which is no longer called that, but is still there, or fat content. So you could end up maybe, Scott, bypassing that lawsuit. But a lot of the factors here are not going to change, and they're actually a demonstration, it seems to me, of how efforts to create equity create new inequities, particularly looking at California. Which I'll come back to in a second. Red Lobster just announced closure, I think, of 48 restaurants. They were formed in the 60s as a poor man's seafood fair. It is hurting those poor voters that the socialist wokesters say that they're working for. Every time they raise wages artificially, they end up hurting those people. In California, where they instituted a $20 minimum wage for the fast food industry only, and exempting, therefore, the higher end restaurants that can hire people at 15 or 16 bucks an hour while they serve $70 steak dinners, and also exempting Gavin Newsom's Panera Bread donor. If you bake bread in the store and sell whole loaves of bread, you're exempt. These are examples of profound inequities in the name of equity that have caused the layoff already of 9,500 workers in California alone. They're not making very good wage there. And many fast food restaurants announcing they're going to move to robotics. Their margins are already very slim. By the way, fast food is shown to have higher levels of phthalates and forever chemicals and other things. So maybe maybe ultimately that's their goal, is to benefit the poorest Americans by depriving them the ability to buy food that's not good for them anyway. maybe
I
that's
made
the
that
plan.
joke in my article about this. I said, hey, at least the bright side of this is that people are going to be healthier by not consuming all this junk at McDonald's and
Yeah, well,
Wendy's.
I mean, let's face it, I don't think anything's going to go back to pre-pandemic prices, but even looking back on how things have just for the last maybe 15 years, it's just increasing little by little. Things get smaller, prices get bigger, and I know Americans prefer to pay the same amount, but that's not happening anymore. Dave, Andrew says when an inflation bomb goes off, it's that way forever. It doesn't go back. So I don't know. Do you eat a Big Mac combo for $20 or do you go home?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, recently, the Congressional Budget Office issued a report on the effect of inflation on the economy. And for the last 4 years of the Biden administration, the cumulative impact of inflation on goods and services has been nearly 19%. And, the number I find disturbing in all of this comes from that same report. And for families to maintain the standard of living that they had when Trump left office, they have to spend $17,000 per year. Those figures are for consumer goods mostly, but I think that we also have to take a look at the big ticket items like weapon systems and the equipment costing billions of dollars. 20% of $1 billion is a lot more than 20% of $5. I think we can agree on that. But every contract has a clause allowing for a cost escalation, and that's to the government, read taxpayer, that it pays as the rise of inflation. It's an automatic cost additive. The cost through development and manufacturing phases, it doesn't make any difference in the acquisition program, whether it takes 1 year or 5 years to field a weapon system. That cost is going to be added. It's non-value added cost, I might add, and it doesn't make the airplanes go faster. It doesn't make airplanes able to carry more ordnance or more stealthy. It doesn't add ordnance to ships or make them go faster. It's just simply cost more over time, and there's no value added.
Well, that
The
brings me
inflation of
to
the
another
currency-
question.
Well, let me just say this. The inflation of the currency is a massive tax increase, and it's an elective choice. Just for people who don't maybe realize that. It is a choice to inflate the value of the dollar, and it's a massive declination of value for anybody who happens to hold dollars or make their money in dollars.
No, that's exactly right.
Because fuel prices impact food prices. Our producer price index is up, wholesale prices are up in new reports. And so the people are going to feel the pain, and takeout food has been rising at a faster pace than home purchased groceries all throughout these last 4 years.
If Andrew is right, then it doesn't matter who's president in 2025. This is going to stay this way. And that's a little bit spooky.
It matters
yeah,
for 2028. In other words, you're right, Sarah. The prices are going to go up. I've spoken with John Clark about this. He is a cattle farmer or beef rancher or whatever the right word is. He owns cows, and we've talked about the price of beef, and a lot of the increase in the price of beef is yet to arrive, because what's happened is the cost to maintain a cow while it's growing before it's slaughtered has risen so much that a lot of these people have sent their cows to slaughter early. And so that's actually suppressed the price of beef by increasing supply. But in a year, that's not going to happen. So you're going to have a double dip, which is the money's going to be worth less, and you're going to have a massive reduction in the supply of beef for slaughter. I share a white-hot passion with LibertyNation.com's co-founder, Tim Donner, for dollar stores that sell items that are more than $1. But that's the past. What does a dollar store do now? You can't have a dollar store because the items that you can produce and sell for a profit for $1 or less become so diminished that, why even bother?
All right, guys. Well, I think we've beat this horse enough. I think I'm going to give it a break. And I think maybe I need to do a little more home cooking and skip the fried deliciousness that those fast food kings and queens keep pushing. especially if Andrew claims we're stuck with these outrageous prices. So thanks for watching, and all of you guys go make a nice fresh garden salad. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform, YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble. We're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our TV productions. I'm your host, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today for Free Thinking, Free Speech, LibertyNation.com.